The Roman army was winning, or at least that was what they believed. The Goths appeared to be retreating. Roman soldiers pushed forward across the battlefield, confident, aggressive, certain that victory was within reach. After all, Rome had defeated countless enemies before. Why should this battle be any different? Then, a massive cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. At first, few paid attention. Battles were chaotic places. Dust was everywhere. But this cloud continued to grow, larger and larger and larger. Soon, Roman officers began to realize something was terribly wrong. This was not dust raised by fleeing soldiers. It was an approaching army, cavalry, thousands of cavalry. Moments later, the riders arrived. The Gothic horsemen slammed into the Roman flank with tremendous force. The impact was devastating. Horses crashed into shields. Soldiers were thrown to the ground. Entire formations disappeared beneath the charge. What had looked like victory only moments earlier suddenly turned into disaster. The Roman line began to buckle. Then another section collapsed. Then another. Officers shouted commands. Standard bearers tried to rally the troops. Veterans struggled to hold their positions, but panic was spreading faster than anyone could stop it. The army was falling apart. Somewhere within the chaos stood Emperor Valens, the man who had ordered the attack, the man who expected a quick and decisive victory. Now he found himself trapped in a battle that was rapidly slipping out of control, and with every passing moment, the situation grew worse. By sunset, thousands of Roman soldiers would be dead, an emperor would disappear from history, and Rome's reputation for military invincibility would suffer one of its greatest blows. But this catastrophe did not begin on the battlefield. It began years earlier, with a decision that seemed reasonable at the time, a decision made by Roman leaders who believed they were solving a problem. Instead, they were creating one of the greatest disasters in the history of the empire. Years before the battle, the Goths were not enemies of Rome. They were refugees, families, farmers, children, entire communities fleeing for their lives. Because far to the east, a terrifying new force had appeared, the Huns. Wherever the Huns rode, destruction followed. Villages burned, kingdoms collapsed, entire peoples were forced to run. Terrified by the advancing Huns, thousands of Goths gathered along the banks of the Danube River. On the opposite side stood the Roman Empire, the most powerful state in the known world. The Goths did not come seeking war. They came seeking safety, shelter, survival, and surprisingly, Rome agreed to let them enter. At first, everything seemed manageable. The Goths crossed the river under Roman supervision. Imperial officials promised food, protection, and land where they could settle. It appeared to be a peaceful solution. But then, greed took over. Corrupt Roman officials began exploiting the refugees. Supplies intended for the Goths were stolen. Food became scarce. Prices skyrocketed. Families struggled to survive. According to ancient accounts, some Goths became so desperate that they traded their own children in exchange for food. What had begun as a humanitarian crisis was rapidly becoming a catastrophe. Eventually, the anger exploded. The Goths rebelled. What started as a refugee problem suddenly became a war. Roman commanders rushed to restore order, but the Goths were no longer helpless refugees. They were experienced warriors, and now they had a reason to fight: revenge. For 2 years, the conflict continued. Roman armies marched against the rebels. Battles were fought across the region. Villages burned. Lives were lost. Yet despite Rome's efforts, the Goths remained undefeated, and with every success, their confidence grew stronger. Then came Emperor Valens. Valens wanted a decisive victory. He wanted glory. He wanted his name remembered, and most importantly, he wanted the victory for himself. Another Roman Emperor, Gratian, was already marching to support him. Together, their combined armies would have been overwhelming. But Valens did not want to share the credit. His advisors brought encouraging reports. Scouts claimed the Gothic army was smaller than expected, much smaller. Valens believed the opportunity was perfect. One quick battle, one decisive triumph, one glorious return home as the emperor who crushed the Gothic rebellion. So he made his choice. He would attack immediately. On the morning of August the 9th, 378 AD, the Roman army marched toward Adrianople. The summer heat was relentless. Soldiers grew tired beneath the blazing sun, yet few expected disaster. Confidence remained high because nobody knew the full truth. The Gothic cavalry was missing, or so it seemed. As the Romans approached the enemy camp, the Goths deliberately stalled for time. Negotiations began. Messengers moved between the two sides. Discussions dragged on. Valens interpreted this as weakness. He believed that the Goths were afraid. He was wrong. Far beyond the battlefield, thousands of Gothic horsemen were racing back toward Adrianople. Every minute mattered. Every delay helped them get closer. And when they finally arrived, they would change the course of Roman history forever. The negotiations were a lie. Every minute mattered. Every delay worked in the Goths' favor. And while Roman officers waited for an agreement, thousands of Gothic cavalry were racing back towards the battlefield. Valens had no idea. He believed victory was already within reach. Then, without waiting for reinforcements from Emperor Gratian, the Roman attack began. Legionaries advanced across the scorching plain. The summer heat was relentless. The long march had already exhausted the men. Sweat poured beneath heavy armor. But the order had been given. There was no turning back now. At first, the Romans appeared to be succeeding. Some Gothic positions began to bend under pressure. Others slowly fell back. For a brief moment, it seemed Valens had been right. Victory looked possible. Then everything changed. A massive cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, larger than before, faster than before, and moving directly toward the battlefield. The Gothic cavalry had returned, thousands of horsemen, fresh, fast, and ready for war. Moments later, they struck. The impact was devastating. Gothic riders slammed into the Roman flank with enormous force. Shields shattered beneath the charge. Formations broke apart. Entire units vanished in the chaos. What had looked like victory only moments earlier suddenly became disaster. The Roman line cracked. Then another section collapsed. Then another. Officers shouted orders. Standard bearers tried to rally the men. Veterans struggled to hold their ground. But panic spread faster than commands could travel. The army was falling apart. Some soldiers fought to the very end. Others tried desperately to escape. Many never had the chance. The Gothic cavalry swept around the battlefield, cutting off routes of retreat. The Romans found themselves trapped, surrounded. With every passing moment, escape became less likely. Then, Emperor Valens disappeared. What happened next remains one of history's mysteries. Some accounts claim he died fighting among his soldiers. Others suggest he was wounded and carried away from the battlefield. One ancient story says he sought shelter inside a nearby farmhouse. The Goths supposedly surrounded the building and set it on fire. If that story is true, Valens died inside the flames. No one knows for certain. His body was never conclusively identified. By sunset, the Roman army had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Tens of thousands of soldiers were dead. Experienced officers had been lost. The emperor was gone. It was one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history. Yet the true impact extended far beyond the battlefield itself. For centuries, Rome had appeared unstoppable, invincible, a superpower that always found a way to recover. Adrianople changed that perception forever. For the first time, the world saw Rome suffer a catastrophic defeat at the hands of a foreign army, and the world never forgot it. The empire survived. It would continue for generations. But something fundamental had changed. A myth had died, the belief that Rome could never be defeated, and on a hot summer day in 378 AD, that myth was buried on the fields near Adrianople. This was the day Rome lost